All right, hello, welcome back, everybody. PayPal and Patreon are down below if you want to support me, only do so if you actually can. So it's time for the monthly OPEC oil production levels update, starting with the largest member, obviously Saudi Arabia. Now, instead of their prior 10 million barrel per day plateau, they've been holding more around 9 million for the last few years because of the effectively permanent production cuts, although they're not officially permanent. The group has, at Saudi Arabia's behest, constantly extended them every single time, and some members have even left the group over it. But, anyways, if you want to see anything about the reasoning behind the permanent production cuts in reality, you can check the link up in the corner there. Saudi Arabia, of course, announced to nobody's surprise that even if the group stops the production cuts, they themselves are going to be holding this lower production level indefinitely. And so for the last few years, they've been holding around 9, and for the last half a year or so, they've actually been tending to stick closer down to 8.9 instead of a flat 9 itself. This time coming in at 8.92. Algeria, one of the only other two that's actually still following those orders, had peaked at 1.4 million barrels per day, had fallen down towards 1 million, but because of the production cuts, they've been asked to consistently hold down around 900. And so this time they came in at 907,000 barrels per day. Their neighbor Libya gradually restoring their production capacity capabilities, and they just recently got up to a new post Civil War high of 1.42. This time they came in just a bit under that at 1.4 million barrels per day. Nigeria, once holding a plateau around 2, had degraded down to only being able to hold around 1.3 because of a mixture of failure to reinvest in oil and gas infrastructure maintenance because of internal government corruption, along with terrorist attacks on their pipeline infrastructure and oil theft on their pipeline infrastructure. However, efforts to combat all of these things have seen them gradually restore some of their capacity, now back up to over 1.5, coming in this time at 1.54 million barrels per day. The UAE had been holding a plateau of around 3 and intends to hold one up around 4 instead, even though they'll be able to hold that one for a lesser amount of time. They want to resize their export ratio since their domestic oil consumption levels in present day are around 1.2 million barrels per day themselves. And although they were supposed to be down at 2.7 or 2.8 under the official orders, they had actually been holding at 2.9 instead, and were starting to climb back up to 3. And then recently they had an abrupt drop down to 2.8, which was likely an unannounced production outage from some kind of maintenance issue, but they've now bounced back up from that up to 2.91. Kuwait would otherwise be holding a plateau of around 3 million barrels per day, but they are one of the two that still obey Saudi Arabia's orders. And they were holding down at 2.6, but now they've been asked to hold down further at 2.4, probably to compensate for a number of the other members' disobedience. So they're following the orders and came in at 2.4 million barrels per day once again. Iraq was supposed to be down at 3.8 most of this time, and instead they've constantly fluctuated between 4 and 4.3 or 4.4, going up to somewhere like 4.4 or 4.3, and then suddenly turning around and beginning to go lower, acting like they're about to go down to the 3.8 that they're supposed to, but then at the last second turning around and jumping back up again. And it looks like they're probably at the bottom of another one of those cycles, as over the past couple of months, they've once again gone from 4.4 down to a bit above 4 million barrels per day itself. Iran once held a 6 million barrel per day plateau, and after the revolution, they were never able to fully restore that. They held at around 4 instead, and when the sanctions hit and they couldn't export anything, they cut their production down to just meeting their own domestic consumption levels, which are a bit below 2. However, in the past few years, when the sanctions were lifted and they were able to actually export their oil again, they obviously started dialing their production back up so that they could do that. However, they've run into limitations because a lot of their fields' pressure gradients are so degraded that they need huge amounts of gas reinjection to keep them pressurized, which has been diverting gas away from the domestic supply network, which has caused heating and power supply issues across the country. And even diverting all of that additional gas and causing all those issues because of it still has not seen them able to restore their production back up to 4 million barrels per day. They only managed to get a bit above 3.3, and now they've started slipping down from that over the past few months. This time they came in at 3.28. Venezuela, once holding a plateau of around 3 million, and given the sheer scale of the Orinoco Belt, they could hold that for the entire century. When they collapsed in the later 2010s, they took the oil production down with them. However, over the last few years, with the help of Chevron, they have gradually been able to recover and are now, for the first time in 6 years, back up over 1 million barrels per day, coming in at 1.03. And then two of the smaller members, Gabon, had declined down to the 180s or 190s from a peak of close to 400, and the addition of a few new small fields and one modest field or moderately sized field offshore saw them bump back up to around 230, this time coming in at 236,000 barrels per day. And the Congo, the smaller of the two Congos, not the larger unstable one, but the smaller stable oil producing one, has declined from their most recent peak down to the mid 200,000s, this time coming in at 251,000 barrels per day. All right, that's it for this one. So thank you everybody for sticking around and listening. Like if you enjoyed, subscribe if you haven't already. PayPal and Patreon links are both down there if you want to support me, just only do so if you actually can. There's a link in the description to a Google Drive folder with these graphs and all kinds of other graphs and data compilations and charts across all kinds of different subjects and metrics. There's a link to my photography Instagram and a link in the top pinned comment to my cat's YouTube channel. May God bless and protect all of you, and I will see you all around next time.